In the Renaissance Florence, power and beauty existed side by side. The Medici influence had spread through every corner of the city, inspiring rival families to pursue grandeur in art, science, and politics. Among those who rose during this golden age was Lorenzo di Rinaldi, a nobleman whose ambition reshaped the Florentine court. His name became synonymous with refinement, wealth, and the pursuit of aesthetic perfection. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, so you never miss more chilling tales from history's darkest corners. Lorenzo was not born into dominance. His family, though noble, lacked the reach of Florence's most powerful houses. From a young age, he studied diplomacy and architecture, understanding that influence in Florence required intellect more than armies. His early patronage of artists and engineers gained him favor among scholars who saw in him a man devoted to progress. By the age of 30, he was appointed Minister of Culture under Duke Alessandro, where he began to mold the city in his own image. He commissioned grand projects that turned Florence into a spectacle of marble and glass. Palaces, cathedrals, and gardens bore the mark of his vision. Lorenzo introduced glasswork innovations inspired by Venetian techniques, producing windows and ornaments that refracted sunlight across cathedral interiors. His preference for transparent materials became symbolic of his philosophy, clarity in beauty and power through perfection. The citizens admired his taste, while his peers envied his influence. The court of Florence transformed under his leadership. Banquets became exhibitions of art, and politics merged with performance. Lorenzo believed that governance should be as elegant as sculpture, measured and harmonious. He surrounded himself with poets, mathematicians, and artisans, forming a circle that rivaled the Medici salons. Visitors from other Italian states came to witness his designs and carried his style back to their own courts. Florence thrived economically and culturally under his guidance. Despite his success, Lorenzo's rule was not without opposition. The old guard, composed of traditional nobles and clerics, viewed his reforms with suspicion. His admiration for humanist philosophy often conflicted with conservative religious figures who believed he placed art above faith. Yet Lorenzo managed to maintain peace through calculated generosity and persuasion. He granted funds to monasteries and sponsored religious frescoes, presenting himself as both enlightened and devout. His alliance with Duke Alessandro strengthened his position. The Duke, impressed by Lorenzo's administrative efficiency, entrusted him with greater authority. Lorenzo began overseeing taxation reforms and urban planning, ensuring that every structure, from public bathhouses to bridges, followed a uniform aesthetic code. His obsession with symmetry extended beyond architecture into governance. He reorganized city councils, standardizing their procedures to reduce corruption and disorder. Under his management, Florence entered what many called its era of crystal. Transparency became both literal and symbolic. Trade records, treasury accounts, and public decrees were now open to scrutiny. Lorenzo argued that true strength came from order and visibility. His reforms attracted merchants from across Europe, expanding Florence's trade networks. The city's glass workshops exported mirrors, ornaments, and instruments that became prized in Paris, Madrid, and Vienna. Lorenzo's approach to power differed from his predecessors. Where others relied on military force, he used influence and design. He understood that to control Florence, one must first shape its image. Every statue, mosaic, and garden pathway reinforced his authority without a single weapon drawn. His personal estate reflected this philosophy. The Villa Rinaldi, situated on the Arno's southern bank, was a masterpiece of glass corridors and botanical arrangements. The villa's central hall featured transparent columns filled with pressed flowers, a symbol of the harmony between nature and artifice. His taste for beauty extended to governance rituals. Official proclamations were delivered in courtyards decorated with roses and magnolias. Court meetings were held under glass domes that illuminated attendance in sunlight. Lorenzo claimed that illumination purified intentions. His peers found the practice excessive, but could not deny its grandeur. Under his rule, Florence seemed less like a city and more like a living exhibition. Lorenzo's influence reached beyond politics and art. He founded academies dedicated to anatomy, engineering, and literature. He funded the construction of observatories and libraries, believing that knowledge was the truest form of wealth. His collaborations with inventors produced early prototypes of clockwork mechanisms and hydraulic fountains. Each innovation bore his insignia, reinforcing his identity as a patron of intellect and beauty. Despite the elegance surrounding him, Lorenzo's administration maintained strict discipline. Craftsmen were required to adhere to specific design principles, and deviations were punished through fines or exile. He considered imperfection a form of rebellion against order. This rigidity earned him quiet resentment among artisans who longed for creative freedom. Yet, the prosperity he brought kept their discontent subdued. Foreign ambassadors praised Florence's transformation under his leadership. Reports sent to Rome and Venice described a city that had surpassed its rivals in organization and splendor. Lorenzo received gifts from European monarchs who sought his architectural counsel. His correspondence with scholars in Germany and France discussed theories on light, proportion, and the human form. He envisioned a future where Florence would be remembered as the capital of reason and beauty. By his mid-40s, Lorenzo di Rinaldi stood at the peak of his power. His reputation as a visionary was unmatched. The Duke often referred to him as the mirror of Florence, reflecting the perfection every citizen aspired to. His image adorned coins and frescoes. Portraits depicted him not as a warrior, but as a philosopher adorned in silver robes, holding a crystal sphere. To the people, he was the embodiment of wisdom and elegance. However, beneath the admiration, tension was quietly growing. Some saw Lorenzo's fascination with transparency as a dangerous metaphor. His insistence on control over aesthetics extended to matters of state secrecy. Every ledger, letter, and plan passed through his supervision. His belief that nothing should remain hidden disturbed those accustomed to discretion. Nobles who valued privacy began to fear his reach, while merchants whispered that his ideals had turned into surveillance. Lorenzo remained unaware of the resentment forming around him. His focus stayed fixed on perfection, on preserving Florence's image of clarity and balance. To him, governance was an art that demanded purity of vision. He failed to see that his demand for beauty had begun to suffocate the city's soul. Yet in those years, none dared challenge him openly. The gardens still bloomed, the glass still glistened, and the name Lorenzo di Rinaldi still commanded reverence across Italy. What began as a dream of transparent governance had become the defining symbol of his reign. The glass he so admired reflected not only sunlight, but also the fragility of his creation. Florence gleamed brighter than ever, but its brilliance concealed fractures beneath. For now, Lorenzo remained the architect of beauty and order, the man who made Florence shine like crystal beneath the Tuscan sun. When Duke Alessandro died unexpectedly in 1541, Florence entered a fragile transition. The court that had once admired Lorenzo di Rinaldi's brilliance now turned to politics driven by survival and suspicion. Without the Duke's protection, Lorenzo's influence weakened. His rivals, long restrained by his dominance, began maneuvering to reclaim control. The very transparency he had promoted became the tool used against him. New council members accused Lorenzo of mismanaging funds from his architectural projects. Ledgers once celebrated for their clarity were re-examined with hostile intent. Clerics questioned his moral priorities, claiming he had corrupted Florence with vanity disguised as culture. The people, once enamored by glass palaces and artistic spectacles, began murmuring about wasted resources and arrogance. Lorenzo defended his record through public addresses, insisting that Florence's prosperity stood as proof of his integrity, but the sentiment of admiration had shifted to envy and distrust. The new Duke, Cosimo de' Velluti, viewed Lorenzo as a threat to his consolidation of power. Cosimo lacked his predecessor's appreciation for art and intellectualism. He valued loyalty above talent and sought to eliminate figures who could overshadow him. Lorenzo's name still carried prestige across Europe, which made him a liability in a court eager to realign its loyalties. Whispered accusations evolved into formal charges. The council declared an inquiry into Lorenzo's administration, citing excessive expenditure on ornamental works and subversion of sacred order. Lorenzo's estates were audited, his correspondence confiscated, and his closest advisors questioned. The Villa Rinaldi, once filled with scholars and artists, grew silent. Servants avoided his gaze. His supporters distanced themselves, offering polite excuses for their absence. Within weeks, Lorenzo was summoned to the Palazzo Vecchio for interrogation. The chamber where he had once dictated policies was now a tribunal assembled to judge him. He arrived wearing plain attire, stripped of the silver robes that had once symbolized his office. The proceedings emphasized betrayal rather than incompetence. The Duke's envoys accused Lorenzo of using glassworks to conceal embezzlement and of replacing piety with vanity. They argued that his obsession with light and visibility was an attempt to elevate himself above divine order. Witnesses, many seeking favor, testified that he had commissioned statues depicting human perfection over divine humility. Lorenzo listened calmly, confident that reason would prevail. He presented detailed accounts proving his expenditures and donations to religious causes, but the verdict had been predetermined. The council declared him guilty of treason against both the Duke and the sanctity of Florence. His punishment would not be simple execution, but something meant to preserve his legacy as a warning. Cosimo, influenced by a circle of religious advisors, decreed that Lorenzo would face a punishment befitting his vanity. It would be a display of beauty turned against itself. The sentence: he was to be sealed alive within a glass coffin, surrounded by preserved flowers from his own gardens, a symbol of eternal beauty, suffocating its creator. The craftsmen tasked with constructing the coffin were former students of Lorenzo's academy. They worked under strict supervision, crafting a rectangular vessel of thick, reinforced glass, reinforced with bronze filigree. Its interior was lined with silk petals and crushed lavender. The design imitated Lorenzo's own aesthetic principles, symmetrical, flawless, and radiant under candlelight. The irony was not lost on the citizens who whispered about the justice of art consuming its master. The execution site was chosen within the courtyard of the Villa Rinaldi. The Duke's order declared it a private affair, attended only by nobles and senior clergy. On the morning of his punishment, Lorenzo was escorted through his garden one last time. The air carried the scent of lilies and rosemary. The paths he had designed for contemplation now led him to his confinement. His demeanor remained steady, his gaze analytical rather than pleading. He observed the coffin with detached curiosity, as if assessing its craftsmanship. The officiating cleric recited passages about humility and divine retribution. Lorenzo responded only once, stating that perfection without mercy becomes a prison. His words were recorded by a scribe, but ignored by the attendants. The guards instructed him to remove his outer garments and enter the coffin. He complied without resistance. Inside, he lay upon a bed of petals, his hands folded over his chest. The artisans closed the glass lid, sealing it with molten resin that hardened into transparency. Within minutes, the coffin became airtight. At first, Lorenzo appeared serene. The crowd watched as his breath fogged the glass, forming small clouds that quickly vanished. His composure began to falter as air grew scarce. The scent of the flowers, once pleasant, turned suffocating in the confined space. His movements slowed, then ceased altogether. The cleric continued his sermon until silence confirmed completion. The coffin was placed within a marble alcove overlooking his gardens, visible through a corridor of mirrors. The Duke ordered it remain illuminated day and night by oil lamps. For the court, the act symbolized moral purification, vanity preserved as warning. The clergy praised the Duke's decision as a triumph of divine justice. Scholars were instructed to erase Lorenzo's name from civic documents, though his architectural works remained too integral to demolish. Florence moved on, adopting stricter religious codes and abandoning the era of ornamentation that had defined Lorenzo's vision. The glass workshops, once thriving under his patronage, were shut down or repurposed for utilitarian production. Years passed, and the memory of Lorenzo di Rinaldi faded from public life. Yet the coffin remained. Visitors described it as disturbingly beautiful, the preserved flowers retaining color even as time dulled their fragrance. The body within appeared untouched, as if frozen in contemplation. Artisans whispered that the preservation techniques had surpassed known methods. Some claimed the glass held properties of alchemical purity, a reflection of Lorenzo's final triumph over decay. Officials dismissed such tales as superstition, but kept the lamps burning. The coffin became a quiet curiosity among nobles. Those who visited spoke of the clarity of the glass, how it reflected their faces alongside his. To some, it symbolized the thin line between admiration and envy. To others, it was a lesson about the fragility of idealism. The Duke ensured no public memorials were built, yet the sight of the transparent tomb persisted as an unspoken reminder of Florence's former brilliance. The irony endured. The man who worshipped light was condemned to shine eternally, visible yet voiceless. In time, scholars of later generations rediscovered fragments of his writings. Among them was a note he had penned before his arrest. The glass that reveals also confines. Beauty, when caged, ceases to live. Historians debated whether the note foretold his punishment or reflected a deeper awareness of his own philosophy's contradictions. Regardless, the crystal coffin of Florence stood as a material paradox, a perfect enclosure of imperfection, designed by the very ideals that destroyed its maker. Lorenzo di Rinaldi's name eventually reappeared in Florentine archives centuries later, not as a villain or saint, but as a man consumed by his pursuit of order. His coffin became part of the city's folklore, described by travelers as both haunting and magnificent. Beneath layers of dust and reflection, the image of a man surrounded by flowers endured as Florence's silent testament to the dangers of perfect beauty. Centuries after Lorenzo di Rinaldi's death, Florence evolved into a modern city, yet fragments of his presence endured. The Villa Rinaldi, though partially ruined, remained a landmark for historians. The gardens had overgrown, and the marble pathways were buried under soil and vines. But beneath the decay stood the marble alcove containing the glass coffin, still faintly visible through a collapsed archway. Locals called it La Tomba di Cristallo, the crystal tomb. In 1764, a group of scholars from the Florentine Academy of Sciences rediscovered the site while cataloguing Renaissance relics. When they uncovered the coffin, they found it intact. The flowers inside retained shape and faint color despite 2 centuries of neglect. The body of Lorenzo appeared uncorrupted, his features preserved as though resting. The scholars noted that the glass showed no signs of clouding or decay. The composition of its surface defied known methods of 16th century craftsmanship. Their reports revived public interest in the man once erased from history. Debates arose about whether his punishment had been divine or political. The church, now less dominant in civic life, attempted to suppress renewed attention, but curiosity grew. Artists visited to sketch the coffin, and poets described it as the mirror of Florence's forgotten conscience. The villa was sealed again by city decree to prevent vandalism, yet whispers about the tomb persisted among locals who believed it possessed protective qualities. By the 19th century, Lorenzo's name returned to academic circles. Historians reassessed his role in shaping early Renaissance humanism. His writings, recovered from private archives, revealed an intellect concerned not with vanity, but with the order of human progress. The reinterpretation transformed him from symbol of arrogance to misunderstood visionary. Some scholars proposed restoring the villa as a heritage site, though financial and political obstacles delayed such efforts. During World War II, the area surrounding the estate suffered bomb damage, exposing the coffin once again. Allied soldiers stationed near Florence recorded its existence, describing the figure within as eerily lifelike. Photographs were taken but later lost in archive transfers. Following the war, the site was declared off-limits to prevent looting. In later decades, environmental changes and neglect caused portions of the villa to collapse. Yet reports from local caretakers insisted that the glass coffin remained undisturbed, its surface still clear under dim light. Modern historians regard the crystal coffin as one of the strangest artifacts of Florentine heritage. Chemical analyses of fragments retrieved from the site suggest the glass contained traces of minerals not found in the region, indicating experimental methods that predated industrial glassmaking by centuries. Some hypothesize that Lorenzo's workshops had achieved a form of preservation far more advanced than previously believed. The irony endures that his final creation, made to destroy him, became his most enduring contribution to science. Today, the name Lorenzo di Rinaldi appears beside those of great Renaissance thinkers. His writings on architecture and proportion are studied in art academies, while the myth of his transparent tomb continues to attract quiet fascination. The coffin remains sealed within its marble chamber, its occupant unchanged, surrounded by the fragile beauty he once worshipped. Time reduced Florence's splendor to history, yet within that glass, the vision of perfection he sought endures, silent, unbroken, and eternal beneath the fading light of Tuscany.